Morning. So today's guest speakers, I'm really pleased to welcome both Kyle and Helen. So Kyle Davis is an chartered psychologist, mind-body psychotherapist. He's a member of our associate network, so we work with lots of different people across various different projects. So I've been speaking to Kyle for well over a couple of years now, and we've been looking at those opportunities to work together. And this is kind of our first shot at that joint working together. And then Kyle is going to be presenting for the next sort of 25-30 minutes. And then Helen Tiffany will join the conversation after Kyle has presented to reflect on what Kyle said and bring some of her own rich experience of just before everybody arrived. The last 25 years have been involved in coaching. So we will talk to Helen very shortly. But if I stop sharing now, and then Kyle, if you want to start sharing your screen, I will hand over to Kyle.
Thanks very much, Pete. Thanks everybody.
Kyle.
Can you see that if I do a view of presenter view? Can you see that okay? Give me a yes if that was working.
That is working.
Brilliant. Thanks, Pete. So, well, hello everybody. Welcome to, I'm going to talk about coaching for wellbeing and performance. And the thing that interests me about this is that, just to kind of 2 minutes on my background, I started my career in management consulting as a psychologist, and that's 30 years ago. And looking at coaching then, it was very much about looking at the individual within their capacity at work. It was looking at their skills, their tasks, their performance, their KPIs, and setting goals in relation to that. It wasn't really about talking about the whole person. So that's how I started. I came out of management consulting, and because I did a whole bunch of therapy training, set up a little therapy practice in 1999. Then I started working with a medical doctor in the early 2000s, and we, along with a little team, pioneered a mind-body approach for working with people with chronic fatigue and pain challenges. So there was a lot of trauma involved in that. And I spent then 10 years working exclusively as a therapist, training therapists, and in that world. And it became evident to me that the principles that underpin the work that I was doing were very relevant within organizations, if not just from a prevention perspective, also from the perspective of looking at performance. And this is where my, I guess, love of the idea that well-being and performance are connected came from. So this is, for me, when I look at coaching, because I do two things in my working life. I go into organizations, I do coaching, I run workshops and trainings, but I also still have a private therapy and coaching practice. So I've got to be upfront and say, well, I'm not coming at this as as a purist coach. I'm coming at this from somebody that kind of muddies the things together. There's a bit of therapy, there's a bit of coaching, there's a bit of mentoring, but we're looking really at the coaching element today. But I think that connecting well-being and performance is utterly crucial. So coaching, really, for me, it's a human to human thing. It's about depth, it's about connection, it's about rediscovering our human capacity. It's helping people see things in different ways, to access what stress pushes out of reach. And really, I see it as about forging a relationship at a time where that seems to be increasingly challenging. And I think that what we've got this reality of modern life, as I would see it, is that it's kind of interesting to me. For hundreds of thousands of years, we evolved in a particular environment where we lived in little groups. We went hunting and fishing. We had a fight with the tribe down the road. And that's the environment that we evolved in. There were cycles. We had embodied presence. We weren't bombarded with constant stimulation, with pressure, with speed, with digital noise. So we kind of evolved for rhythm, cycles, community. We existed in relationship to everything else and in relationship to ourselves. And I would say fundamentally, that's what drives us. But what we have now is this pressure, and here's a question for you: when you reflect on your life, to what extent are you operating out of pressure as opposed to out of presence? And I think we exist in an environment, we exist in society, in a culture that invites us to be continually looking outside of ourselves, trying to match ourselves to our perceived expectations of life, of reality. And in doing so, I think we are becoming, or we have become, disconnected from ourselves, disconnected from our body, and disconnected from a sense of meaning. I think there is that frenetic, frantic rushing around that we can experience, and our system goes into overload as a result of that. And I think for me, therefore, this is why coaching now matters more than ever, because I don't think we need more information. We're swimming in a sea of information. I think we need more integration. I think we need an opportunity to reflect. It's interesting. I was talking to a client the other day, and he was saying to me that he said there's this guy in the office that I work with, and he takes time just to sit and look out the window. And he said, I just couldn't do that. Um, and I said, well, why not? And he said, well, I'm just, I've got too much to do, and everyone is rushing around, everyone's busy, and I haven't got time to kind of do that. So I asked him about this guy's his performance, and how his productivity. And so, well, on reflection, actually, this guy's probably doing better than most of the rest of us in the office. So I said, well, have a conversation with him about what he gets out of that time of looking out the window. What exactly is he doing? And it transpired that this was his opportunity to reflect, to connect with himself. And it was just a few minutes that he'd do it, but he would take that time. And I think that's what we don't have. I think we've got a reduction in our emotional bandwidth, or as we say in the trauma world, our window of tolerance, because we're perpetually stressed. And I think that one of the things that happens when we're perpetually stressed is that, from the neuroscientific perspective, it's almost like a rewiring that takes place of the stress system. The more you're stressed, the more stressed you're likely to be. And that's kind of where well-being comes in, because I would look at it that, well, I guess what I experienced in working with people was that it was very often, and I think this is the change in 30 years, is that it was very often the case that when people were presenting with a problem they're experiencing at work, that there was some other challenges involved, and looking at the whole person in this holistic sort of way, it became evident that there were things that were going on, and sometimes they were simple fixes. And it could even be something like, well, a person not sleeping well. I had a client this week that was talking about being agitated. I've been through a couple of weeks feeling really agitated. On people at work are getting on my nerves, and it was that idea that it was the externalizing. It's something out there is causing me to feel something. That's the problem. That's the problem out there. We just looked at his sleep, and it was, well, yeah, I've been sleeping 5, 6 hours a night for the past couple of weeks because things have been busy, and I've started watching this new show on Netflix, and so it was a prioritizing of Netflix TV time over getting sleep. I said, well, at the risk of oversimplifying this conversation today, it could just be that if you had a little bit extra sleep, that you changed your system, you changed the body mind, and that changes your perspective. Because I think fundamentally it's important for us to be mindful that the body influences the brain, that influences perception, that influences our expectation, and the experience of reality. So, at the risk of sounding deep, our reality is created from the inside out. what we expect to happen often happens, because that is a result of how we're feeling influencing how we're thinking. And even if it's something as simple as being hungry that affects your perceptions, we know that from the state of our nervous system to our emotions, our intuitions, how much sleep we're getting, how much we're exercising, what our diet is like, all of those things, the body, the physiology is affecting our perceptions. And that, it's when we can understand that, it's going to it affects our decision making, our clarity of thought. So we have to factor in this well-being connection. And I think in a culture which is very mind orientated, very thinking about the next 6 things I have to do, with a real focus on getting things done, moving quickly, thinking about things, shutting down, looking outwards rather than in. So for me, coaching is, it starts with that reflection. And as I said earlier, do you find you're frantic, or do you find you're flowing? Are you operating from pressure? Are you operating from presence? Do you give yourself time, like the guy looking out the window in his office? Do you give yourself time for reflection? And what might happen if you did? Because for me, coaching is offering that space. I'm coming from the belief that people have the resources within them, and very often they're not creating the space to give rise to the clarity, or provide opportunity for that clarity to come through. So I've written here, a way to understand this is state, story, self-concept. It's a 3S kind of idea, is that our state, our physiology is affecting our brain. And, the way the brain works is the brain's not looking at life. The brain is looking into your body, and it's making predictions based on previous events. And it's generating stories. And it's also then generating a self-concept that goes with that. And that is the reality that we are experiencing, which is why it's so important that we can understand that, right, well, my well-being, my physiology, that's going to have an influence over the stories and the narratives that are happening. And then my sense of self, all combined, gives rise to how I'm seeing life. When I look in and begin to cultivate some self-awareness, and then be open to the idea that there are other resources within, there are other opportunities, there's other ways of seeing things, then it's not about fixing necessarily. It's creating, it's understanding, if you will, the architecture behind behavior and thought. It's recognizing that the body then is part of the conversation. It's not separate from it. So coaching is not about fixing for me. It's about freeing up what's already there. That's the inside out. The things exist within there. And it's creating space for insight to reveal itself. The joy I have is when I can have a conversation with a client, and maybe they go away and they come back, and they're cultivating that self-awareness. They're developing emotional intelligence, and they're opening themselves up to the feedback that they may get from inside. And they come back and say, do you know what? I had this insight this week, and it really gave me this fresh perspective. And that's not me giving somebody something, uh, which is, it's in contrast, I think, to the lot where culture is currently, which is us looking for something outside of ourselves. It's me inviting that person to develop space and tap into their own resources. And when that happens, that's when clarity, insight, realization present themselves. And I'm sure you will have had this experience yourself of, are you one of those people that has your best ideas in the shower, when you're riding your bike, when you're out gardening, those times when your mind is kind of a little bit freer, when you've slowed down, that's when insight can present itself. So I think coaching for me is empowering that personal growth. It's, just to kind of briefly touch on these things, For me, reflection is breaking autopilot. The scientists would tell us something, what is it, 99% of our behavior is unconscious pattern. And of course, this makes sense, doesn't it? Because when we look at how we evolved, it's the brain has a couple of jobs effectively. At a top level, the brain is looking to facilitate our survival, and then it's energy management. It's like it's balancing a metabolic budget. So what that means then is that we're going to do things on autopilot. It's like predictive text. In order to prevent energy wastage, it's going to predict the things that it thinks are going to happen. And it means that we can tie our shoelaces, chew gum, and have a conversation at the same time. But it also, well, the downside is that we can just continue the same patterns that may not be useful for us. So I think coaching offers that opportunity for that reflection, and then stepping out of autopilot to see things in a new way. It's, as I've talked about, it's recognizing that the body and the state of our nervous system is our physiology is impacting our perceptions and our behaviors. And I mean, and everyone's had a few nights of bad sleep, haven't they? And that particularly if anyone's had kids and you've had young kids and you're not sleeping, how that affects your perceptions. For those of you that may exercise on a regular basis, you go a few days without exercising, or a week, and you're sat at your desk a lot, and you realize the impact that has on your cognitive functioning, on your decision making, on your mood. So understanding that, I think, is vital. I think we have a fundamental human need for a sense of autonomy and agency. And because we don't control anything in life, the only way we can master that is by being self-aware and internally directed, so that we recognize, well, I have agency over me. I have choice over the things that I do. And I can shift my perspective to empower myself. So for me, at the root of it's self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and empowerment. And of course, as I was saying before, we exist in relationship with other people and with ourselves. And sometimes it's about fostering a new relationship with ourselves by understanding ourselves in a new way. So why do people get stuck? It's the three S's, really. It's state, story, and sense of identity or self-concept. And I think that when we can understand that our system is protecting us, and when we're in this a world of turmoil, just going back to what Pete was saying earlier, where does the time go? The vast majority of people, in my experience, have a sense that time is speeding up. And whilst in our kind of Western culture, we have this scientific paradigm where it's reductionist, materialistic, and we see things in very kind of compartmentalized ways. There's other ways of looking at it, that it's more about relationship. We exist in relation to everything and ourselves, and we have a relationship with time. So the idea that time is speeding up makes perfect sense. And of course, there's a lot more things happening, aren't there? Again, we live for hundreds of thousands of years. We lived in a very similar environment. Now we've seen this rate of change over the last 150 years, last 50 years, last 20 years, last 2 years, last 6 months, where this exponential shift is taking place. And obviously this is impacting us because we're not used to this rate of change. So this brings on a lot of uncertainty, and we're kind of swimming in a kind of cultural soup of uncertainty and anxiety. So we tighten, the narrative narrows, our identity begins to contract. And then the stories begin to feel true when they match our physiological state. So we need to be mindful of that. And, it's when awareness dissolves, then it begins to result in us seeing things in a similar way. So we then begin to force. So by opening up and softening, connecting with ourselves, taking time to reflect, which we can do within that coaching setting, then it gives rise to shifting perceptions by, firstly, when we are in a grounded, centered, present state, that creates the space for the clarity. We can see things in different ways. We can see ourselves in a different way. And we naturally would do that anyway, because a calm system results in clarity. Now, that's kind of a little bit of a sort of theory of things. Let me talk through, give me if the slide will change. Let me talk you through a few kind of case studies. I know I've had a couple of examples thrown in already, but let me just touch on a few. This was a really interesting one because for me, it's really simple stuff. But I had this guy coming in and stressed out, thinking that time management was the kind of the key piece. And he wondered if I had some kind of magical time management kind of tips and tools that would solve the problem. And of course, for me, it's very transactional, because I'm much more interested in, well, why is time management seemingly a problem? Who is it that is creating an experience where time management seems to be the challenge? That's where we want to be looking at. But of course, he understandably would look at it from a time management perspective, because that's how we work. We're in this transactional culture where we're looking outside of ourselves for the solutions, for the tools, the techniques, the protocols. Give me something, the 10 steps to getting fit, the 6 steps to losing weight. These are the things that we look for. So within the coaching setting, of course, I'm assuming, well, the answers lie within him, but we've just got to give him the opportunity to see that. So when we began to look and question, and all I'm doing is offering questions to look a little bit deeper, it became obvious to him that his behavior was influenced and his perceptions were influenced by some stories that he was running from, some beliefs, which are all also connected to a sense of self. The I am, I am a people pleaser. When we tie our identity into that, then that's going to be a big predictor of how ultimately we behave. But it's not necessarily the truth of who we are. So it was beginning to shift that, and beginning to shift that sense of the identity shaped by pressure, as I've written there. And as he could do that, it wasn't that he needed the time management tools as such, because that was the irony. Again, he tried loads. It wasn't about that. It was about shifting that relationship with himself, which gave rise to seeing things in a new way, which influenced then the way that he did things. Now, burnout is something I was listening to. Dr. Rangan Chatterjee's podcast recently, and he was saying, "Feel better, live more," which is great. I think it's a great podcast. But he was saying that, I don't know where he got this stat from, but he said something like, in the UK, 80% of employees in organizations report experiencing symptoms of burnout in the last year. 80%. And then we get the other stat I heard a couple of days ago on a podcast, which was like 15 to 20% of people, of employees within organizations, report that they enjoy their job. And of course, when it comes to stress, I think it's the number one reason for stress is work overload. Which of course, it's interesting, the stress things, because the reasons for stress, it's very often something outside of the self. And whilst I'm very much in alignment with Pete, where this idea that, well, it's an organization challenge because we're existing in relationship to everybody else, it's the nature of those that impacts us. I still think that there is a need for us to look at ourselves, and this is again what coaching is doing. So for this particular client of mine, she thought that her exhaustion was just about the workload. And then when we began to question things a little bit deeper and look and reflect and take the time, it was evident that she was in an organization where she had the story was that there's no room for emotion here. We have to just crack on with it. We have to get things done. I can't show emotion, because we have this funny idea with emotion that if you're emotional, that's a bad thing, and emotion may be just something you talk about. the funny thing for me is that as a person that's worked with emotion for many, many years and an emotional person, is that emotion is informing everything that we're doing. Even when we think we're being entirely rational, our physiology and our emotion is affecting our perceptions, as I've been saying. So that idea that I shouldn't pay attention to emotion is it only ever results in problems if I suppress it, which in this instance was symptoms of burnout. So there was, in an environment like that, it almost becomes an unconscious pattern that I can't take a break. If I'm coming out of a really challenging meeting and I feel this need to maybe just go for a walk around the building, I can't do that. I've because the culture is I've just got to get on with the next thing. So it's the approach, and that was the thing for her. And that was then what came out. But it came out by tapping into, looking inward, tapping into the deeper sense of, well, what's going on for me? What am I actually feeling? And if what I'm feeling is feedback, if I can be open to that, what I feel is feedback. It's like the lights on my car dashboard. If I can allow it, it's feedback. Let me pay attention to it. Then it can inform what I'm doing rather than I just need to get rid of it. I need to crack on. I need to think a little bit better, which doesn't happen because when our physiology is clouding our thinking, then things go wrong. So I'm conscious of time, so I need to be moving on. Uh, this was an interesting one for me because it really gives an example of kind of top-down processing, confirmation bias, a predictive brain. I was dealing with one of the two individuals that were involved in this challenge, and just an example. And many of us have had this. This guy said to me, he said, I just, if I see an email from, this colleague's name in an email, because the idea was this colleague doesn't like me and is trying to sabotage me. And this was the story that was running. And there was a tightness of the physiology. So that led to this predictive idea, a bit like, when you buy a new car and you don't think anyone else has got that car, and all of a sudden you're seeing that car everywhere. When that perception is connected with a physiological state, particularly if it's connected to a stress state, then that gets locked in, and the brain is predicting that's like your predictive text. That's what's going to be happening. So I'm going to prepare you for that. So I just got to see that name in my inbox, and body is tightened. The feedback body is tightened, then affects the perception. So a neutral email, and you showed me some of the emails that would come in, even a neutral email was interpreted in a negative way. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, this colleague doesn't like me, he's trying to sabotage me. Everything then through that creates a stressed state, and both of them was pretty stressed, it would appear, but that created a stress state which impacted the perception, which impacted the action, and the self-fulfilling prophecy comes true. What I expect to happen happens. And when we looked at, well, let's understand these things. Let's understand how you work. Let's look at what you want. Let's look at some fresh perspectives. Let's separate out the sensations from the story that I'm telling myself about these sensations. Let's just be curious about this. Then it facilitated this better regulation, which led to better perception, which led to better teamwork. So for me, coaching it's reconnecting. It's creating that space. And as I say, I think we need it now more than ever, because I think we're so busy, we're so lonely, we're so involved with our machines, our technology, that are we really connecting? I think we're already in a culture where we're disconnected from our body. So for me, coaching is connection with the body. It's the part that tells the truth. It's connection, opportunity for connection with emotion, the signals that are going to be telling us what matters. Connection with identity. That deeper, authentic part beneath all the stress and conditioning, and connection with greater meaning and purpose, which is really what is missing for so many people. And that's the compass that gives us direction. And ultimately, of course, connection with other people. So those are the things that are important. So if there's one thing, I'd like you to take from this, it's the beneath the stress, beneath the habit, beneath self-protection. We are resourceful. We're designed to connect with ourselves and connect with others. From that comes creativity and wisdom. And coaching simply gives that space to return to that truth. So thank you for that. And hopefully I haven't gone on too long, and I'm going to stop sharing now.
Perfect. Thanks, Kyle. Really appreciate it. I certainly recognise some of the stuff you were talking about there within myself and my own experience. So this gives us an opportunity now to introduce our next guest, Helen Tiffany, who is CEO of the Coach House Limited. And Helen, can I just ask you to tell us a bit about the Coach House before we head into some questions and reflections?
I would love to, but first of all, I just want to say, Kyle, so many things resonated for me there, and let's get into some of that. The other thing I was just going to say is, I love seeing people's faces. If any of you are happy to turn your cameras on, I'd love to see you. It feels much more like a conversation. I understand that we're recording, but how wonderful to see some of you today. That's really important to me. Hi, Victoria. Nice to meet you. It just feels like, we're together in a room rather than broadcasting out.
You should have the ability to turn your cameras on now. We kept them off during the presentation so that
Mary,
you now have the power.
Yeah, I love that. Where to start? Yes, I have had an organisation for the last 25 years. I've got a phenomenal team, and we do three things. We help organisations with leadership in a variety of ways. We coach people in a variety of ways, and we train people to become coaches. And that's how I know Pete. Recently, I was asked to write a chapter of a book on coaching in the third sector. And as an organisation, we've done, probably we're about 2/3 private sector, the third sector. And it caused me to kind of really reflect on, is there a difference between the coaching that I do in the private sector and the coaching that I do outside of that? And in terms of the issues that people bring, there's very little. And if we think about stress and burnout, which is rife in both of those places, a lot of the symptoms are the same. A lot of what people are presenting with me is the same. But what feels quite different is the nature of people working in a values-based organisation. And that was what I really started to reflect on in terms of people wanting to change. But for example, I was coaching a social worker not long ago. She's terribly stressed. Her caseload is ridiculous. And I mean that, it's ridiculous. And so there's this huge desire to change how she's being, but the resources aren't there to help her change it. And as much as we can explore all of those wonderful things that you were just talking about, Kyle, what are those beliefs that she is holding on to that's stopping her from doing those things? Her motivation to change is high, and there's some things that she can do to change how she's being. But a lot of it is driven by the organisation that she's working in. So as you were talking, Kyle, I was thinking about the times in my life when I have felt those things. So not as the coach, but as a woman. And I think one of the biggest, the biggest moments I had that changed me from being someone who was probably stressed quite a lot of the time to managing it better was sleep, was getting good sleep. And as someone who is also in menopause, and I'm sure some of you can relate out there, it got worse. It got worse with menopause. So whilst I managed it from a stress perspective, menopause kind of reawakened, no pun intended, reawakened all of that for me. So managing my sleep has become absolute priority, and I never thought that I would say that. I never thought I would think so much about the quality, to the point where I have just spent way more money than I thought was possible on good pillows. I take more magnesium than probably anybody should be taking, but I care about the quality of it. And I tell you this because I think it's sometimes these small things, very practical things, that are the things that help us. You know, the coaching work that I do with people, often what that turns into are practical solutions. And I think what we have to do, if we are coaches, if we are leaders in business, managers in business, is help people do a few different things. I don't know if you want me to carry on, Pete, so I'm going to pause for a second.
Yeah, no, I recognize the sleep thing as well. I think the biggest thing I've done about the sleep thing is I leave my mobile phone downstairs now. So I have removed the screens from the bedroom, and that has had a massive impact on actually my general well-being. What I'm interested to hear from you, Helen, is you work with some pretty large organizations, corporate space, third sector. What do you see in those organizations when they adopt coaching as part of the way that they work? What's the difference between having coaching within your culture and not having coaching? And while Helen's responding to that, if anybody has any questions, please either put your hand up or type in the chat, because we've got about quarter of an hour left. So yeah, over to you, Helen.
Okay, so I think probably one of the biggest things that I find is that when organizations start to adopt coaching in a number of different ways, but probably the main one is when the leaders at the top of the business start to use coaching as part of their leadership style. When I see that happen, I think there's a few things that happen. The first is, I think they start to foster a much more supportive environment. Because when you, and you will know this, Pete, when you learn, and some of you on this call, I'm sure, are trained coaches, counselors, therapists, etc. When you learn the skills of that, what it starts to do is you have much greater self-awareness about what affects you, what affects other people. And so you bring that into your consciousness as a leader. So when someone is standing in front of you saying, oh God, I'm so stressed about this project, instead of going into that fix-it mode, oh, well, you know, maybe if you just went home a bit early today, we go into coach mode, which might just be as simple as, tell me what's going on. We start listening more when we bring coaching as a culture into an organization. And I think it fosters much more emotional resilience. We, as leaders, start to have that capability to identify what stresses people are under and help them develop practical strategies. And I'll give you a very real example. So I mentioned that I'm writing a chapter of the book. It's very much top of mind at the moment because my deadline is looming.
Mm-hmm.
And last night, as part of my research on this book, I was interviewing Lynn Perry, who's the chief exec of Barnardo's. And I was talking to her about exactly this thing. And I said, having introduced coaching into your organization, what do you think the differences have been from a leadership perspective? We went on to talk about more things, but that was the basis of it. And she was talking about having come from a culture of more command and control during COVID. And that during COVID, we all went into this mode as organizations. We had to be more directive. You know, we were in crisis mode. But of course, that's left a legacy. And so she feels that since having more leaders trained as coaches, and indeed, she trained as a coach too. She trained with us as coach. She said she started to listen more. She started to ask more questions. And she said it fostered much more autonomy. And that's what they were trying to create again, was this sense of agency and sense of autonomy in the organization. And I think when you start using coaching techniques, you don't have to be, you know, a trained professional coach. You can just learn some of the basic skills. But once you adopt that, I think there's much more of a person-centered approach to leading an organization rather than all of the emphasis being on corporate objectives. you start to have a greater awareness, I think, of what your people need to work at their best, to function at their best, to perform at their best, and enjoy it. And I think that's another one of the things there, which links into the wellbeing piece.
Absolutely, and I'd back up, having been on the course. So it's about 6 months, was it? It is a 6 month course, isn't it? So having been on the Coach House's sort of certificate in coaching course, I did notice, and I've got a few members of my team in this call now, so they'll either nod or shake their heads. But I believe that my style of leadership is where I'm using that coaching now. My automatic response is to try and fix, and I am now conscious and aware of that. That I step back, so I can see Mary smiling at me now. She's
what do we think, Mary? Is it true? Is it?
It absolutely is. Yes, 100%.
What have you noticed is different?
It is that the conversation cycle. It's a case of, right, okay, now then, what about you? It's all those questioning techniques, and that's like, there's no solutions really that are being found for you. The solutions are being found with you, and it's just going back and looking at things through your own eyes and your experiences. So you're not being told what to do, you're being guided as to, right, okay, so what do you think? Where are you? It's all those kind of things.
I think there's a few things that you can do, because really what we're talking about is managing up. And so one of the first things I always think about is, what do I notice about how my manager likes to communicate? And even if you go kind of, quite baseline on this, are they a detail person? Are they a big picture person? So what communication style lands with them? Because if we want to see a shift in the conversation, we also have to do something different, right? So I remember many years ago, I reported into an MD who, a bit like you, I never really felt listened to. And as I would be in there having a one-to-one conversation with him, he'd wander around the room. And I thought, well, he's not listening to anything I say. And I felt, everything felt, I felt disrespected. And in my heart of hearts, I knew he wasn't disrespecting me, but it is kind of how it felt. I didn't feel listened to. In the end, I plucked up the courage and I said to him, when we have those meetings and you wander around, I said, it makes me wonder if you hear anything that I say. And he said, I do that because I find it's easier to listen when I'm wandering around. I was like, oh, okay. But he was so shocked. He said, oh, I feel terrible that that's how you feel. And so we sort of came to a compromise in a way, which was that there would be times when he would stand up and wander around, but he would stay facing me, because sometimes you just look out the window. And I found this incredibly off-putting. The other thing that I realised was that he was so time poor. When I put together quite detailed reports, he never read them. He read the last page. And that would really annoy me because I had spent hours doing it. So in the end, I said to him, when I write those reports, how useful are they? And he said, I'm going to level with you. I only ever read the summary. So I think learning how they would like to communicate can be a real game changer, because I think it takes some of the pressure away. You start to understand what they need from it, but also it opens up the dialogue for you to say what you need. Because if you're saying, what else would be helpful? There's an opportunity for you to say, could I just say what I would like?
Part of what I was going to say was, it's useful to have a sense of what your expectations from that are, what your expectations from your manager are as well. Because it's really, I find a lot that people are disappointed because they have these expectations which are not articulated, which is what Helen says of, well, what is it that you want, and can you articulate that? And now it may be that through a conversation that facilitates what you want, and your manager can see things in different ways, but it may be that it doesn't. So then I think there's a sense of, well, to what extent can I be self-directed and self-corrected? What do I need? If I was in my manager's position, what would I say to me? If I was fulfilling that role that I want my manager fulfill, what might I say to myself? Because I think that we have a lot more resources inside of us than probably we think, and we fulfill the roles that we think that follow who we think we are. So I think that, that's having that, being clear about what you might want from your manager, articulating that, and then if you don't get it right, well, what can I do for myself? What if I step out of my current role and
we are reaching the end, and I do like to keep to time, so I'm going to thank some people and just share a little bit more information. I just want to read out something, if I may, within the chat from Victoria, who says it's really tough when you're in a senior position to show some vulnerability with your team. Used to think to maintain the image of strength and distance, but following coaching and being able to shift. I think that shows the power, and that it is a two-way thing, and often fear sits within a lot of the bad behaviors of leadership. So we could all benefit from coaching, whether we're an emerging leader or an existing leader who's used sharp elbows to get to their positions. I think coaching is a really valuable thing to consider.
Can I jump in there just
go
really quickly, Pete, because I think that's really interesting, that notion of I can't be vulnerable. Whereas when I'm talking to leaders, I encourage them to do the exact opposite, is model vulnerability.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the very reason that Platform Wellbeing has built a compassionate leadership course, where we kind of promote that thinking in that it's okay to be kind, to show compassion, but that doesn't mean that you're weak. There's a difference between being soft and gentle or being a good person and weakness. So thank you, Helen. Thank you, Kyle. I really appreciate your time. I'm just going to share a couple more slides, if I may, to bring today to a close. I've popped this link into the chat window. This is just some feedback. We could really do some feedback after each session. It helps us define what people want. So there's options to tell us what you want to hear about. We can go away and work on that. Coaching is available through Platform Wellbeing if you're interested. So I am looking to take a couple of days a month where I can practice coaching and build just some time to enable that. Kyle is one of our associates. We're building that network of associates as well. So we're offering that coaching through Platform Wellbeing. What I would say, if you're interested in becoming a coach, and whether that's operating as a coach directly or using coaching as part of your leadership, through the Coach House, Helen offers what I would say is a really, really impactful course. I found it very valuable to be part of. And for those working in the third sector, there are discounted rates to take part in that course. So I'm sure we can share some information from the Coach House in a follow-up email as well. But as somebody who's been through it, I would highly recommend it. I was slightly concerned going into it. Would this be corporate-y? Would this be something that sits outside of my values-based work? And it was completely the opposite. There was so much alignment that it was really encouraging to step into that space.
And Pete, I'm just going to say, in that last session, I don't know if you remember what the work that Pete did in that session, and what he talked about last session. I was gone. I was in tears.
Yeah, sorry, I made people cry.
It was very precious.
Yeah, I think the bit that really surprised me. So the course is not just a learning course. You are practicing throughout that process. So working with people, complete strangers. And what I was amazed with, I'm not going to cry this time, Helen, I guarantee it. But what I was amazed with is the willingness for people to be authentic and to share some of their stuff that they've been really stuck with immediately with somebody that they've just met. That trust is kind of like quite encouraging in a world that feels quite harsh. That softness and that trust was really, really powerful for me to experience, and hopefully for them to be able to share as well. Platform, our support, we are there. We run courses, so we We've got our courses on relational approach to mental health. We've got our courses on compassionate leadership. We run talking therapies. We run training workshops. We've developed resources on creating reflective practice. Another way of delivering some coaching within organizations is that group coaching or reflective practice. We offer clinical supervision courses. So if any of this is of interest to your organizations, please get in touch with us. We are here. And I think that is it. 1 minute past 12. I apologize for my tardiness. I appreciate everybody coming today. If you enjoy Christmas, have a wonderful Christmas. If, like me, you're a bit of a humbug, try and have a good break. And I really appreciate everybody turning up. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Helen.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Thank you, Pete.
Take care.